Good morning. Can I welcome members, invited guests and the public, both here and watching on the webcast, to today's meeting of the Regeneration Committee at the London Assembly. Members of the public may like to follow us on Twitter at London Assembly and take part in the meeting discussion using the hashtag Assembly Regeneration. Our main topic of discussion is on the Mayor's Opportunity Areas programme, but first we have a few short items of formal business to go through before we get to our guests. Please make sure your electronic devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any unnecessary interruptions this morning. Item 1, can I start by asking our clerk, Jonathan, if any apologies have been received for today's meeting, please?
Thank you, Chair. No apologies have been received.
Thank you. Declarations of interest, item 2. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendation set out at item 2? And can I ask Assembly members to declare any other disclosable pecuniary interests and other relevant interests? None. Thank you. Minutes. Can I confirm the minutes of our meeting held on the 28th of January 2020, please? Thank you. Item 4, summary list of actions. Can we note the outstanding actions arising from the previous meeting of the committee, please? Yep. Thank you. And then we get to the substantive item. Perfect timing, Deputy Mayor. Item 5. We're moving on to the substantive item of the Mayor's Opportunity Area programme. Can I welcome our guests to the meeting and invite them to introduce themselves? Deputy Mayor.
Jules Platt, Deputy Mayor for Planning, Regeneration and Skills.
Thank you. Darren?
Darren Richards, Growth Strategies and Urban Design Manager, GLA Planning Team.
And Sarah?
Sarah Scannell, Assistant Director of Planning and Development at the London Borough of Hounslow.
Thank you. And Councillor?
Councillor Martin Seaton, Chair of Planning in Southwark and a Ward Councillor in North Walworth.
Thank you all. So we'll start with question 1. We should start with question 1, shouldn't we? And we'll start with the Deputy Mayor. Is the current approach the best means of delivering the intended outcomes for opportunity areas? And why don't you just start, sir, by saying what an opportunity area is?
Right. Well, they're the capitals. They're simply identifying the capital's most significant growth locations. And the definition of that being that they can accommodate at least 5,000 jobs, 2,500 new additional homes, or a combination of the two, or something of that order. And the documents aren't there to impose any new policy or conflict with any existing policy, either London plan or local. It's about sort of aggregating the information and possibilities and opportunity, and crucially the infrastructure needs that need to be brought forward and constructed to enable that identified, opportunity of homes and jobs to be brought forward.
And is it the best means, do you think? If you were doing this from start, would you have gone down this route?
Well, it's a means. I think it's a contributor to bringing these forward. I'd be keen to get across that they're not. Obviously, yes, they are in place to encourage the development to come forward, the right kind of development. The latest OAPFs, obviously encourage good growth and drawing on London plan principles and policies. So obviously we want capacity of new homes and jobs to be brought forward, but at the same time it would be wrong to say that it's the vehicle through which these things are delivered. It's a sort of a contributory sort of information gathering and process. And also, as I think we could get into, the process is almost as important actually as the outcome as well. It's the bringing people together in that phase of constructing the OAPF documents that is a useful thing, as it always is in when, say, if you just looked at a small development area, an estate regeneration, for example, and those initial years of bringing people round a table and drawing lines all over maps and planning. So it's kind of part of the suite of documents that you would want in place when you were saying, if you were challenged, anyone challenged, whether it be the mayor, the borough, or indeed anybody, well, what's the intention to what could one build there? What should one build there? And if you took that forward, what would it need to make it happen and happen well? And I think the OAPFs are a document that's meant to kind of answer that series of questions rather than be a vehicle through which City Hall drives something, because it's not intended to be like that. It's, as I say, one of the suite of documents, and it's shared between the GLA and the borough. The GLA can't impose the document on a borough. It's got to be a consensual sort of two-way thing.
Okay, thank you. Has the GLA level of support been sufficient to enable the effective delivery of the intended outcomes for the opportunity areas? And rather than starting with the Deputy Mayor, why don't I start with, dare I say it, the customer? So maybe Sarah and then Councillor Seaton.
Well, the London Borough Council has two identified opportunity areas, one in the current London Plan and another one in the new London Plan. And we have decided as a borough, we lobbied for those to be included. We were very keen for those to be part of the London Plan identified opportunity areas. We've decided to take those forward as part of our own local plan review. And I think throughout the process of, we're still to get to adoption, but throughout the process so far, we've been closely talking to the GLA at all stages to identify how best we can deliver those through a variety of means. So some parts is to do with transport, parts is to do with homes, parts to do with releasing and changing the way that we look at industrial land. So from Hounslow's perspective, it's been an advisory role from the GLA, and we will eventually, once we get to adoption, turn that into an OAPF. And we've had the support of the GLA officers throughout that process.
Okay, Councillor?
Yes, it is useful for me to be here. Usually I'm fronted by my colleagues, are the cabinet member for Great Estates, which is our council home delivery programmes, or by my colleague Councillor Situ on planning, regeneration and licensing. I normally sit behind the scenes, but although a significant influence. I'm here today. I accepted the invitation because it seemed right that this time I should be out in the open. So first of all, we have three opportunity areas at Elephant Castle, Canada Water, and of course Old Kent Road. These are significant areas which are areas which we hope will build more than 20,000 new homes across the piece over a period of time. Is this the best way of proceeding? Yes and no. Yes, clearly we need to identify areas which we want to develop because they have capacity for those developments. But clearly, if we make such a statement, what we are actually saying to industry is that this is an investment opportunity. And the moment you say that, what you effectively do is to create a rush to acquire land and plots of development opportunities. Consequence, of course, is that you immediately impact upon the viability of any schemes that are in those areas. And I hope later on we can get onto that as to the impact of a strategic authority such as the London Authority identifying in its London plan an opportunity area, then a local authority such as Southwark conceding that this is an area for development and the consequence it has for the local community to whom we ultimately serve. So I'm going to pause there for the moment because, of course, what will happen as we proceed, I'm sure, is that we begin to understand the impact of the opportunity areas, both on the authority, those who live there, and of course the industry as a whole.
I think you hit the bullseye there, Councillor, and I think we're moving on. I think my third question is almost a repeat of the first two, so I'm going to leave that and move on to AM Shah.
Right. Want to explore social and economic values of opportunity areas and what was planned, what's been achieved so far. It's kind of areas I want to cover. Starting question is, what should be the primary benefits derived from the opportunity areas? If we can start with the borough guests, yeah. So, what should be the primary benefits derived from the opportunity areas? What is therefore the scale of what you have embarked upon in your areas, and how much have you achieved? Now, starting with Councillor Seaton, you mentioned for example, 30,000 homes as the target or the sort of what you're embarking upon. Not only homes, there are jobs as well. So would want to know what would be the case in your borough in Sadak. Similarly, Sarah, if you can tell us that as well, scale and what actually you achieved. So maybe we start with Councillor Seaton.
Thank you. Again, another reason why I'm here, I want to make sure that as we make decisions, particularly in planning, that all of our decisions are well contexted, not only in our planning policy, but in our wider responsibility. So, of course, we have our social regeneration charter, where we sort of map out what are the needs for local people within those opportunity areas and indeed across the borough. So across the 3 opportunity areas which I've identified, there's one. We identify, first of all, health inequalities, secondly, housing inequalities, and thirdly, the job inequalities. And where we identify areas where there's significant deficits, what our sole aim, of course, is using the planning and indeed the related policies in order to address those issues. So what have we achieved, I suppose? First of all, we have a clear intention, and we have the largest council house building programme, I believe, in London, not compared to the mayor, of course. Secondly, we have a clear programme to address health inequalities, and thirdly, we have a clear programme to address housing inequalities. So since my time as chair, we've hit a minimum of 35% affordable home quantum on all of our approvals to date, with the exception of one exception, which I might refer to Jules later on, but we won't discuss it right now, I suppose. Okay. Secondly, that has meant that we've been able, through the private sector, to achieve record numbers of affordable homes. But alongside that, we have a programme to build just over 11,000 new homes within the immediate future, of which 250 have been poured to date, and there are a further 1,700 that will be achieved this financial year. In the preceding years, those numbers will rank up quite considerably. Our programme is intended to be sensitive and acknowledge that the market is challenging. Skills is a challenge. Us no longer being part of Europe, and the accessibility to the affordable labour is going to be a challenge for us. So that may well increase our cost, but that's a genuine increase. It's not caused as a result of pure speculation. It is caused by simply supply of labour. Secondly, and I think equally as important, it is so important that as we begin to project forward what is our genuine achievement, that's measured by our local residents. They have got to see a measurable change in their life experience within the borough. So this is a measure for us, and in terms of broad satisfaction. A resident who is currently unemployed, not in education, and therefore not in any particular scheme, part of our regeneration schemes should contribute, and this is linked to our social regeneration charter, should contribute to ensuring those individuals find either an apprenticeship or they are taken on as part of a broader programme to ensure that local people are employed and are therefore trained in either basic what we might call either academic or contemporary, best word I should use here, in those jobs such as plumbing, electrical, or general development work. They're actually employed. So we judge it by the numbers of those individuals who are entering the workforce. To date, we've successfully, since the past 3 years, 5,000 individuals who are otherwise not employed are now employed as a result of our regeneration schemes. And what we aim to do is to continue to increase those numbers over time. If these opportunity areas are not contributing to improving the life chances of local people, then it's not regeneration, it is something else by another name, which I will not mention today. Okay.
Sarah, again, primary benefits, and then what your plan says you require to achieve in terms of jobs and homes, and then where you are in that respect.
So the London Borough of Hounslow are working on two opportunity areas. One, they're both quite different, but one for 7,500 homes and 14,000 jobs, and the other in the different part of our borough for 12,000 homes and 11,000 new jobs. So we are at the getting to the end of the road of putting our plans in place, and we know that the biggest issue for London Borough of Hounslow is the affordability of new homes, so that's a key priority in our plan. And the two different areas have distinct needs in terms of the job opportunities. So reflecting what my colleague has said, it's really important that we look at the nature of our jobs that we've got. And in the west of the borough, we've got a huge high employment, but lots of it is low skilled, low paid. So we're working on employment plans to improve the quality of the offer that we're providing in those new jobs. And in the other opportunity, the Great West Corridor, we're looking at the affordability of homes because the land values are so high that we've got to make our mark that we are providing for our residents in the tenure of homes that we provide. I think the challenge in terms of where we've got so far is the planning policy process is long and arduous, and we've been working on these plans for nearly 5 years. They are still not adopted, but we are, as my colleague has said, dealing with applications coming in on the back of this great label as being an opportunity area. So we've had to try our best to enforce what we want from these plans and the social and economic benefits that it will bring in a world where we don't have the policy backbone to support us in some events. And that's led to some challenges. So, for example, we've had one scheme that's come in front of the Mayor because we weren't quite in a position where our policy allowed us to make that decision. But in the converse to that, in the west of the borough, where we've not had very much development movement, we've seen huge rises in the opportunities that have been presented to us as a council because we've got the label of an opportunity area and we're going out to the market saying we are an outer London borough. You've not heard of Feltham and the west of London Borough of Hounslow before, but come and we will be open for business. And we've got this emerging plan, and it's framed and it's coming.
Jules, if you can move to you. You've pretty much alluded in terms of primary benefits or what you expect opportunity areas to deliver. On question of delivery, I mean, if you want to add on that basic vision, please do so. But also, I think what would be very useful for this committee to have is London-wide figures, if you have, which you can write to us in terms of, borough by borough sort of breakdown, what were the planned delivery figures, homes, jobs, where they are currently in terms of numbers completed, numbers started, so on. I think it would be good to have an audit, and obviously when did those actually, when were they implemented in each of the case, and what the overall target period is for development as well.
Yes, we'd be happy to supply figures. It might be useful to do it by opportunity area, so you'd have 47
sure,
sets of
absolutely.
figures.
Yeah.
Obviously, some are at different stages, so some are purely recently designated that we're still calling them nascent.
That's the designation. Yes.
And then obviously ones that are very well developed out and nearing completion. We certainly can supply the homes delivered for each one. There's more of a difficulty with jobs because we don't actually have the number of jobs, but we do have floor space, business floor space created. So if one wanted to use I'm sure we could come up with a proxy of
from
jobs,
that you can
jobs
extrapolate
per square metre of the different types of, B1, B8, B1C, etc., B1A. So we can certainly supply those. I think, on terms of impact, I think one of the key things, obviously, it has is to prompt interest from the development community in an area that they otherwise might not have been considering. But I'm always keen that we try and deter people thinking that this is whilst I think the open for business phrase is a good one, and it's one that we all use. it's not a running up the flag saying, you know, this is the Wild West of development here, come and build, you know, loads of dense things because, you know, that's what the designation is. It's not about that at all. What I would prefer to think is going on when a developer plays interest into an opportunity area is the fact that they have greater clarity about what is wanted in the location. And of course, developers like certainty. Their shareholders like certainty. And so I think that's sort of a useful thing that the OAPFs bring in terms of journey towards outcomes, is that certainty for developers. And I've mentioned that another outcome is the process itself of engagement and community involvement in shaping it. Certainly the ones now, I'm not sure that was always the case, but certainly the ones that we've been doing in the last three or so years have that's definitely been a strong focus. Yeah, that's what I was going
PD rights, sorry. Yeah,
do you mind if I just to build on that last point about particularly social and economic impacts? You know, the work we do at the moment now with the OPS we're working on, particularly intensively in Abbey Wood, but work we did in the Isle of Dogs, is we do look at social infrastructure requirements that the growth is requiring. So we don't just look at how many homes and jobs the area might be able to have capacity for. We also look at what that would mean in terms of the number of schools, what would the impact on health services. So it's a very important part of delivering a framework, whether it's the GLA doing it or whether it's a borough doing it through a local plan, and they will prepare their own infrastructure delivery plans. That part of that is assessing what the requirements will be from the level of growth that could occur in those opportunity areas. So that's how and then those will be built into some of the policies or the recommendations in the OPF that could then would influence planning decisions as those developments come forward.
That was one of my questions I was going to follow through whilst we're at it, which is delivery of social infrastructure, which is what you're talking about, whether it's the health facilities, medical facilities, or school places, and so on and so forth. At what stage do you plan? How is it funded? And how it is monitored? Because we are developing very large neighborhoods, which we want them to be sustainable. Yeah, and therefore that delivery of social infrastructure is critical for success of that. So to me, that needs to be part of early planning. So how are you managing that important aspect of the whole opportunity area program?
So part of the reason we focus on these areas is because they will require funding, and we've already sort of explained in the London Plan how as to deliver the level of growth in the London Plan, London requires more investment. So part of the opportunity area frameworks is to justify why this additional housing could only be delivered with a level of investment. Often it's more closely linked with transport investment, and that's where things like the Old Kent Road opportunity area are very closely linked to the need for the BLE. Without the BLE, we would not see the level of growth in the Old Kent Road. But it's also true for the social and economic infrastructure. But that's where that's why the partnership's important, because a lot of that funding will either come through the council or through developers paying community infrastructure levy and Section 106. So again, by setting out the requirements at the start, it gives councils more ability to set out what they will be requiring in their delivery plans through infrastructure levies or through Section 106 agreements on individual sites, so things like schools. For example, which has happened on the Isle of Dogs, to the negotiation with developers on major sites and the requirements for education facilities.
Okay. Right. If we can move on to the bits on affordable housing. Are the affordable housing targets for opportunity areas mandatory, assuming there are clear requirements for affordable housing and therefore there are targets associated with that? If so, what powers does City Hall have to ensure that those delivery targets are actually met?
Well, on enforcement, I'll turn over to Darren on the issue about how different, because I mean they wouldn't really be different to our ability to, in any application, it has to be dealt with on its own terms. and the existence of the opportunity area framework doesn't add any additional policy.
So there aren't any
existing
targets.
policy, the existing policy would
Yes,
would run.
so the London plan, London plan target, 50%
Sure.
strategic target, 35% threshold, applies in opportunity areas as it does
Anywhere
elsewhere.
else.
The other
So-
thing, in terms of target, the homes figures in the plan are not targets. So there are assessment of capacity over the next 25 years. What the policy is asking is that through working with the boroughs or through our work on frameworks, we start to look at what that capacity is looking at on the ground. There are obviously high-level targets, high-level capacity figures. Through the process of the frameworks and through local plans, looking at the sites and looking at things that have changed since then, often they can change, the capacity figures can change, and we could identify what particular sites could accommodate in terms of development. The affordable housing target would be the requirement in the London plan at 50% or 35%.
So there are no specific or separate targets. They are what London plan requires, full stop. Okay. Moving on to the next one. I've got a figure of 303,000 homes, which must be the total delivery figure for opportunity areas. And here it says 40% will be low cost. The question here is that when does the mayor expect the opportunity areas to deliver the estimated 303,000 homes? Would it be at the end of 25 years? Or how does it work? How will it work? When will we have this target achieved?
So we have provided, so as part of the examination in public, we provided, and we can send it to you, but it's on the website. So we were asked about those figures. So as I said, in the plan, we've got for each opportunity area a homes capacity figure and a jobs capacity figure.
Yeah.
But that is to 2041. What we were asked was how much of that, those figures are in the first 10 years and therefore are in the borough's 10-year targets for housing.
Yeah.
So we have split that out in terms of capacity. So I can send you
Please,
those details.
Yeah.
And I haven't got the totals in front of me, but obviously it's not that 300,000. It's significantly less than that, because as we state, a lot of the capacity in these opportunity areas is latent. It is capacity if we got the transport investment, if we were able to acquire the land, if developers brought forward development in the next 10 or 15 years, rather than hold back and wait for things to change. So it is, I think we can be more certain about the next 10 years, but for the 25 years, the plan's very clear that a lot of that capacity will not come forward if we don't have the transport investment. So with things like the Bakerloo line, West London Orbital could affect Hounslow, DLR, the DLR, potential DLR extension through Beckton to Thamesmead, that potentially could deliver another 7,500 homes in Thamesmead. That won't come forward if we don't have that DLR connection. So it's a latent figure. It's a figure that could be delivered if the investment was made in certain transport infrastructure.
What about this 47% low cost?
I'd have to check. I don't know where that.
If you
that
can
figure's-
check what,
It'd be useful if you could tell me which document you're quoting from.
I think we'll have to go back to
I don't
scrutiny
recognise
teams
that.
outside this
We
meeting.
certainly in this plan we do not have a target
Yeah.
for low-cost housing, and we wouldn't normally set it in an OEPF. Boroughs do set their own affordable housing targets, and it is open to them to differentiate those targets in particular areas of the borough if they thought that was useful. Often they do because of the spatial distribution of affordable housing and how they want to plan for that.
I've got two further bits I want to explore very quickly. One hasn't quite featured in the way I want to see. We talked about social infrastructure. There's the physical infrastructure as well. And I'm not just talking about public transport, bus and train journey improvements, etc., in those areas which are so critical for the new and existing communities. My question is, I live on the edge of opportunity area in Harrow. Already, before those 2,000 or 3,000 homes and other activities become functional, you often find gridlock. Yeah. Now, question is, and this is not untypical, I would say, for any areas in London, particularly outer London areas where you got huge problems at that level in terms of congestion and pressures on local infrastructure. Is there planned investment and program to meet those local infrastructure changes that would be required or are required already in readiness for the large developments that are taking place? Because it's not fit for purpose now. It probably will be worse when massive development, which we need, comes into being.
I mean, certainly OAPFs seek to, or today's ones seek to, deliver modal shift and encourage people walking, cycling, public transport. Obviously, in larger areas where there might be, whole new road layouts delivered. But I'm thinking there of things like Thamesmead and Abbey Wood and the Royal Docks, where new town centres effectively will be created with the benefits that those would bring to localities, and there obviously is an opportunity there. The problem is where there is already well-established road layouts. If speaking directly to your gridlock question, Darren.
Well, as part of the preparation, we're talking about transport infrastructure. We work very closely with Transport for London, and they recognise that in the Mayor's transport strategy, which does talk about how, particularly in opportunity areas, there is maybe need for future investment, not just about the big schemes. So maybe we've been talking about these big major schemes, but we do still look at the smaller interventions, particularly around local connections. So a major part of us working with boroughs on a framework, because often the boroughs are the transport authority here rather than the TfL, because they'd be the borough roads, but looking at how we can encourage people to walk and cycle to those facilities rather than use cars, or they can use public transport. So we do look at that in terms of where are the social infrastructure, where are those facilities, how are the new residents going to get to them, and are there existing or new links that we need to create? Could that be linked to things like greenways and making those journeys safer, making them quicker for people, so they do default to using sustainable modes rather than using the car. We'd also work with the boroughs if there are existing problems. We would work with that would be factored into the work we do on the framework. It doesn't just assume that this new development, we only look at what the impact of the new development is. A lot of the modelling that's done looks at the impact across the area of existing development, planned development, and then what additional infrastructure might be required from the new development.
Thank you very much, Chair. Over to you.
Thank you. We're moving on to the environment, and Assembly Member Arbour.
I've got various questions. Can I firstly say that Felton, as far as I'm concerned, is not a forgotten part of London, as far as that's concerned. Yes, I really want to ask whether or not opportunity areas can do anything to combat climate change. Is there anything that local authorities on their own can do to combat climate change? And really, as in a direct question to you, Jules, how relevant are opportunity areas in contributing to a low carbon economy? But if I can ask I suppose Sarah first, because yours is the borough I'm most familiar with. How are they combating climate change in Brentford?
Interesting. So our plan has been, as I've said, has been in the making for 5 years, and in that time we've changed the world has moved on in relation to energy. The fact that it takes so long to get planning policy through means that the policies that are in that plan reflect kind of old style thinking. So what we're doing at the moment is encouraging every developer we have to be better than what our policy says in terms of, specifically in terms of a low carbon economy. And we are seeing that there's been a very positive response to that in the development industry, but mostly because our members are holding us to account when we're saying that to them. So we get to planning committee and we're seeing things become under lots more scrutiny if they're not higher on the scale of a low carbon scheme than they would be. But effectively what we would be looking to do in our plan is to set stringent policies that would mean that all developers have to adhere to higher carbon requirements on schemes, on sites, than they do currently. Effectively, it's the power, the planning system has the power to ensure that all developments are as green as possible. It's just how far and how quickly we can turn the juggernaut that is the development industry to realise that they've got to invest more money in making their schemes zero carbon.
Since you're Director of Development, do you think, for example, rather than, and if I can take the new Brentford stadium and the huge development you have there, 950 odd houses, and this is a general point, I wonder if there isn't any double counting in the figures we have here for opportunity areas. Clearly I'm most interested in the Great West Corridor, that a great many of the targets which are in there for housing and other things, notwithstanding you say it's been thought over for 5 years, many of these developments have actually been longer than 5 years in the making, and it may well be that this current mayor and indeed his predecessor seized on stuff which was already in the pipeline and put them into the opportunity area to make it look as though opportunity areas are more successful than they really are. That's possibly not one for an officer like you, but one for a politically appointed officer like Jules. But there is an element, is there not, of double counting?
If I just 2 seconds to come back on that first, we have been really rigorous about our numbers, and we've been held to account not only by the GLA on what numbers go into that capacity, but also our own members, because they're very much like you, the past is the past, and the developments like the Brentford Football Club with its zero affordable housing and the fact that it doesn't have very good energy credentials because it was approved in a different plan time, mean that we don't want those numbers we don't want those developments to be our legacy. The plan that we've got, as specifically about the Great West Corridor plan, those numbers are capacity sites going forward, not the ones that have been granted planning permission to date.
I see. Okay. Is there any element of double counting as a sort of general point, Jules?
Not that I'm aware of. They're clear that it's additional capacity that it's meant to be identifying. In terms of keeping score on delivery, I suppose the new London Development Database will certainly help us keep track of this better and in real time. But I'm not aware of a systematic or even isolated incidents. No one's ever brought one to my attention that claimed that there was an element of double counting.
And I suppose, and you, Councillor, does climate change actually come into any of your thinking at all in Southwark as far as opportunity areas are concerned?
Well, it most certainly comes into our thinking in Southwark. We've just recently appointed a Director of Climate Change, and we have a Cabinet member with responsibility for climate change and developing our strategies. We are, in fact, next month going to hold a conference as to how we can embed that right across the authority. But I'm bemused, of course, sometimes when I hear planners talk about this subject. Of course, within either the Southwark, London or National Policy Framework document, the way it's discussed is as an aside. And what we don't have is primary legislation that gives local authorities real powers to implement a strategy to reduce carbon, to reduce our carbon, to reduce carbon, but also implement across the piece through the local authority strategies that improves the environment, reduces continues to improve air pollution, reduce the use of plastic, and of course also seeks to generally teach people how to live healthily. The challenge we have as local authorities is that the powers rest with central government, and those powers have not yet been fully delegated to local authorities. If we had the powers to implement a truly effective carbon reduction strategy in Southwark, we would do it overnight. But we just don't have those powers. I don't believe it's embedded in our planning policies, you see. So we're not allowed, for example, to say to a developer, it must be, a development mustn't, your development must be absolutely neutral when it comes to generating carbon dioxide. It must be neutral. Yes, they pay into our carbon offset fund, okay, as a way of mitigating the impact, but the materials and the policies just don't exist at a local level, which is why it persisted. We would say to you and to government that what you need to do is give us real powers to create the environment in which all developers know that if you're going to develop in London, not just Southwark, this is our minimum red lines, and within those red lines, you now develop your development proposal. That's a certainty that they need. At the moment, they can get out of the option by simply paying us money, and thereby we come up with an alternate strategy to offset carbon, or indeed other materials that might get into the atmosphere.
Okay, thank you. Sounds like a prescription for lots of climate change enforcement officers, which might well drive developers out of London.
Can I respond to that? But that's a really important point, and it also goes back to the earlier point as to how confident we are as local authorities. Hitherto, prior to my election as chair of planning, I was told one of the reasons why many developments prior to my arrival were yielding less than 35% affordable homes is because the development industry wouldn't tolerate it. I have to say to you, that is a complete fallacy. Really? We in Southwark most certainly are overwhelmed with applications because we've created a certain environment in which developers know exactly what are the minimum red lines that we would accept. And therefore, they've cost that into their financing prior to making the proposal to the borough. And it's what's really the real problem we have in London is lack of confidence. This is a major financial centre in the world. We have land values which are so through the roof that local peoples cannot afford either to rent or buy a house in their immediate neighbourhoods. That is not the result of the market. It's a failure of politicians like us to be clear about what our policies are and why those policies exist. Confidence is why I say to colleagues, we must have confidence that we are an attractive city. This is a place for investment. We are open for investment, but on our terms, not on the terms of the market.
It's truth. Thank you, Chairman.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Chair, sorry, may I come back on the environment point?
Yes,
please. And in connection with OAPFs. I mean, obviously, an OAPF in its development is expected to very much absolutely draw on the London Plan. And clearly the London Plan is very specific about environmental requirements and expectations on improving air quality, as well as things like modal shifts. So whether it's the transport strategies or the environment strategies, they're played out, although we didn't try to duplicate all those two documents. The suite of documents together delivers the outcomes that we're looking for. But Darren does have actually some good examples of where the recent OAPFs that we've drawn up specifically illustrate the expectations of the policies in the strategies and the London Plan.
Yeah, so we take the strategic policies in the London Plan and look at how they would be applied and implemented in the opportunity area. So the example I give you now is the Thamesmead Abbey Wood opportunity area planning framework, which is currently out for consultation. And there's a whole section on there around the environment, but around green infrastructure. There's a section on energy, because one of the advantages of looking at an area that's going to have a significant development is the opportunity for an energy master plan, and looking at how we can share and look at the energy requirements of that area. being on the coast, but being on next to the river, flooding and flood risk and a riverside strategy is very important. So we work very closely with the Environment Agency about that. So that, again, is built into our assessment of the framework. And also things like waste and recycling. The circular economy is also built in, and air quality. So how can, it comes back to this point about creating healthy routes, how can the development in the OPF contribute to improving air quality and reducing exposure to poor air quality? So all those things are what we do is take the strategic policies, look at how could they be applied in a local area, supporting the boroughs in applying these policies at the local level, so that developers are very clear, and it comes back to this point about certainty. Development in the area is very clear about what the expectations are around the requirements for development.
Well, no third runway is going to help you, isn't it? You've seen the decision, haven't you?
I don't know what's the time.
Okay, thank you.
I think I might be able to cover that in another 14 minutes, I think.
We're all very happy in this building anyway.
We are, yes.
Moving on to my colleague, Joanne.
I want to ask about some of the challenges there are in opportunity areas. Now, Jules, at the start you said that the process of becoming one is important. It brings partners together, but I think London First did a report in 2015 and they highlighted some challenges about it being quite an informal process. And it's one of the challenges for the GLA that you don't have a more formal process and can't impose a more rigid structure and monitoring requirements on local authorities.
Did you say 2015?
Yes.
Yes. I mean, I obviously I wasn't here then, but I think I'm right in saying that the process now is very different to the earlier ones, the ones that we've done more recently. And Darren's probably better placed to comment about the way we now go about it. Certainly the documents are a lot thicker and more detailed. And again, maybe we could talk about in what way the documents have changed and been more specific about trying about what's needed for delivery, rather than being. I don't mean to be pejorative, but I think they were a bit more about brochures before about the opportunity, as opposed to here is the opportunity and this is what we need to put in place in order to get delivery.
I mean, I suppose my question is really from a GLA point of view, given that these are going to build the homes that you need for your targets as well. Do you think the structures are there that you need?
I think we because of the nature of planning in London and the mayor's powers around planning are quite prescribed. Yeah. I think we've arrived at the best we can do with the status of the London plan. The conformity, so with the local plans have to be in conformity with the London plan, or general conformity. So by identifying these areas, we have a way to have discussions with the boroughs about how we take forward those opportunity areas. In terms of how they are defined and then adopted, there is, I'll disagree about there not being a formal process. The process of preparing the London plan is a formal process that's set out in statute and in regulations. We consult on them, there is an examination in public, and the point to make is that successive panel inspectors have supported the principle of opportunity areas and supported the evidence about why they're required. And often it's around changes or new opportunities around transport infrastructure, and around the opportunities that derive from new schemes coming forward or proposals for new schemes. And I say, well, if those areas are going to be affected by development, we know that areas which will see better accessibility will face development pressures. It must be better to manage those pressures by having a plan and identifying the area and saying we need to plan for those pressures than just ignoring it and waiting for it to come along.
Yeah. I suppose my question really is that you'll have different opportunity areas and they will all have different challenges. But is there anything that you would need in extra powers to make sure that you can drive the necessary development from a regional point of view? I'm going to come to the local in a minute.
I think powers, yes, but not necessarily as part of the OAPF. Okay. I think that the powers and process are there to do what the OPF needs to do, as I've said, about the identification. Delivery powers, though, changes to CPO and things like that, whilst welcome, are probably the stage after the OAPF as opposed to part of it.
Okay. Can I turn now to Sarah and Martin? There's obviously the current structure. Can you just perhaps briefly outline to us what some of the challenges are in delivering those homes and jobs, and perhaps then go on to what you would like to see?
So, one of the issues that has not quite come up yet is our Heathrow opportunity area bridges Hounslow and Hillingdon. And there is a bit of a challenge there about the apportionment of numbers. So Hounslow, as I've said, is a very pro-borough. We're working very hard to make sure that we deliver the most jobs and homes we can for our borough. Hillingdon have a different perspective on what they're doing on the edge of their borough, and that means that part of the opportunity area has come under some scrutiny. So we're now facing to go to an EIP with the numbers, because we've actually basically taken up most of the numbers of that opportunity area on the basis of a quite challenging negotiation with Hillingdon on who's going to take what, effectively. That is part of the duty to cooperate, and there's nothing new in that. That's what planning is. But it's something that if there was, it seems like there might be an additional power that could help that. Not that I know the answer when you've got boroughs that are just very clear on what they're planning to do, but it does seem like it's a part of the cross-boundary issues that will need more exploring. Part of our challenge has just been the treacle that is the planning process to get plans across the line. We have been dealing with, it's not a policy vacuum. We deal with schemes all the time in these areas and ensure that they are in conformity with the plans that we've had in place as much as possible, and we've been quite successful in that. And then I think the kind of the long-term issue in terms of monitoring, we are held account in our numbers just as we are for our wider numbers. So we report our numbers to the development database. Our members require that we report those numbers to them, and we are being held to account over the quality of those as well. So we've got a very much an internal local kind of council process for monitoring, and then we've got the LDD, or what it will become, to kind of feed into in a London-wide how our opportunity area will make that happen.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and if I can add to that, avoiding repeating what's been said, which is quite correct. As I said earlier on, the greatest challenge we have, particularly I suppose being in inner London, that the existing use value, once established, versus the value when there's a proposal for development, are so vastly different that it then thereby impacts upon the ability for us to secure an acceptable level of affordable homes. So that is an issue for us to contend with. If it were possible that we were able to use our CPO powers to secure those plots of land, once we've established with a developer what is to be built there and agreed the terms, that would, I suspect, improve the value of the contributions that boroughs are able to make to the overall housing development schemes across London. But of course, that's the first issue. The second issue for us in terms of the GLA and the grant environment. I understand that many developers don't approach the GLA because of the complexity of applying for grants. Now, it does seem to be a very bureaucratic exercise, and the reasons why some developers may not approach the GLA may be purely internal, but it does appear that the bureaucracy around the grant funding environment is quite bureaucratic and may not be working if I may say so, strategically in the public interest if developers are choosing not to apply for grant funding. And then the last issue, if there was an issue for opportunity areas, and as I said at the beginning, as soon as we make the statement, this is an opportunity area, my colleague here said, well, we're open for business. We're definitely open for business, but we are clearly we sit on prime land, here in London, only a stone's throw from the major financial centres and, of course, from Parliament. So Southwark sits on prime land, and therefore the viability environment schemes do not work in Southwark. A small change to the component in the environmental scheme means a significant change in the affordable home quantum. So in Southwark, we say that developers should think about not the current value of the proposal, but what the likely value of the proposal will be over a 5 or 10 year period. It's highly unlikely here in London anyway that land values or indeed house values are going to decline. They're likely to continue to rise over time, and that's been proven the case for the past 50 to 100 years. And therefore, I would really encourage the GLA and central government to think carefully about the conditions here in inner city areas, particularly like Southwark, and the impact these broader policies have on our ability to deliver on our what is our total commitment to build homes that local people can afford. Okay? And it should not be purely determined by the market.
Okay, it leads me on to my next question, and again to the local authority representatives, if I can, and that's just about the funding opportunities that there are in these opportunities area, and you obviously have competing priorities. Infrastructure is extremely expensive. How is providing that infrastructure progressing in your opportunity areas, and what are the difficulties?
So infrastructure is the biggest cost, and we realise that, and I think as Darren has outlined, because we're doing ours through a local plan, we've got the infrastructure plan attached to that, which outlines fundamentally, if you want to provide this many homes and these capacities on these sites that you've outlined, you will need to do X, Y and Z in your infrastructure to make that happen. We hope that our SIL strategy is aligned with that in the specific areas, and we're utilising all the kind of planning powers we can to make that happen. But what we found is that the plans that we've put in place for those opportunity areas have assisted us in going to other bidding areas. So, for example, going to TfL and saying, we've got this plan in place, make this one of the Mayor's transport priorities, because we've got these plans in place and it will come through, and we've got planned development that you can identify what time they will come through. So I think, as Darren has already touched on, one of the examples is in the Great West Corridor opportunity areas, the West London Orbital, and that has now been taken on and developed with the West London Alliance, and TfL are working very closely with us to deliver that connection into the Crossrail hub. That is fundamentally because we made a great business case that in the Great West Corridor, you've got 7,000 homes, 15,000 jobs coming that will make that transport connection work. And then it grew from there. So other boroughs came on the back of that and said, well, we've got an opportunity area, we've got these planned sites. So that's how we've through our infrastructure plan and our SIL charging, but also using the planned-led approach to justify bidding opportunities in its widest sense for other funding structures.
Jules, we've heard about that local authorities report to you their targets. Do you think the GLA has a good wealth of information about what's happening in each of the opportunity areas, and you're able to monitor what's happening there sufficiently well?
There is plenty of data, but it's not always in real time. Certainly on both applications and delivery, and that's why we want to revolutionise the London Development Database to make it more real-time set of data, plus being able to more accurately monitor delivery. There's even work going on talking to the UK Space Agency about being able to monitor changes in developed surface area of the capital to enable changes on sites to be picked up more easily. But that's a development down the line. It isn't any more intrusive than Google Maps. So before anyone's worried about that. I mean, probably Darren is probably best placed to go into the sort of the technical detail of what data we do have. But just to sort of come back to a point about infrastructure, I mean, obviously, there's the one of the, as I said, the key thing for OAPS is to identify what's needed and can corral different players into kind of being able to bring forward funding. And probably one of the best examples of creating a new mechanism for funding is probably the Northern Line extension at VNEB and the whole TIF thing to fund it being born out of an OAPF process.
And so to just take your monitoring point, we are producing an annual monitoring report. And I think your officers have seen in early stages of that we will put up onto the website, that starts to track progress in each of the opportunity areas and development using the information we're getting now from the improved LDD. Just on the infrastructure point as well about preparing these documents when there isn't the funding. Well, often they can help make the case for the funding. So a good example is Housing Infrastructure Fund, where a large number of opportunity areas where will be unlocked by the successful bids around the DLR, around the overground. So it was an important part of that bid that we were able to link the improvements to particular sites and particular areas in London, because that was what then made the business case stack up to have successful bids. And so having those in place, whilst there might not be a funding stream at the moment, we know that there will be something in the future. So having that work means we can very quickly respond to it. If we didn't have that, it would take us a lot longer to respond to those kind of requests for information about, if there's money to invest, where would you like us to invest it? This gives us an opportunity to put together a bid to be clear about where investment would unlock delivery of new homes and new jobs.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. On your last point about the Housing Infrastructure Fund, could you write to us just a very brief which ones have actually got money and what they're going to do with it? Because I lose track of what's happening, which ones are happening, which ones aren't. So just be a very simple, not a huge war and peace. That'll be
happy to get you the detail on that. I mean, off the top of my head, obviously there's the DLR depot and extension at South Poplar, the Isle of Dogs and South Poplar. One has the OPF has contributed to. I think I'm right in thinking that the overground one has also achieved, got to the stage of acceptance, which things like the Canada Water OPF would have contributed to justifying that investment.
That's great, thank you. That comes on to my next question, actually. What measures have the Mayor put in place to support boroughs that struggle to finance opportunity area development? So other than the HIFs, what else have you done, Jules?
Sorry, Chair, could you...
What measures has the Mayor put in place to support boroughs that struggle to finance opportunity area developments?
To fund opportunity area developments?
Or pump prime them, I guess, what we're asking, really, because obviously the developers...
So there's a couple of things here. So firstly, there's obviously the work we do directly in preparing OPF. So that's particularly important where, and it goes back to actually Sarah's point about the Hillingdon Hounslow. So a good example here, Thamesmead, it straddles the boundary between Bexley and Greenwich. Both boroughs preparing their local plans didn't have the capacity to do the work that we all agreed was needed there. So we've stepped in using our resources to lead on that proposal. In other places, it'll be more support through other teams in the GLA. So with Old Kent Road, where Southwark are leading, we have a joint team that works on that. We have a partnership board that George sits on that oversees that. There will also be other work we'll be doing through the local plans. As Sarah's mentioned, we will put resources in place when local plans are being prepared to meet and talk through the evidence, and we might assess the evidence that's being prepared. Transport for London often will put in resources around modelling and help with looking at coming back to the impacts of development, so they will assist using their modelling expertise to assess the impacts of development for boroughs. On broader notes, there's things like public practice, so quite a few boroughs are using their public practice placements to focus on opportunity areas. I know Newham and the Royal Docks team there have public practice placement. Bexley have one working on Thamesmead and Bexley Riverside. So in terms of the planning support, that's the support we can provide. There is also money going in around from housing and land, things like the land assembly pilots are looking at opportunities for could you acquire land, and so that's more about the expertise of boroughs around things like CPOs and acquiring land and pulling land together. So Housing Land is supporting a project around that. And there's also some work around industrial intensification. So looking at sites, thinking how do we have some exemplar sites that demonstrate what intensified industrial land will look like.
It's a real mosaic of funding, and all these things. I mean, a good example was probably the meeting we had the other day between Newham and Greenwich and TfL, trying to create a pot of money that could look at both taking the DLR over the river from Beckton into Thamesmead, but also sort of in a more immediate future a bus rapid transport link in the Thamesmead area, and you know, sort of 100,000 from one borough, 100,000 from another. I think it's 500,000 from TfL. I think it was something like that. So I think we
Plus
were
the developers.
So plus the developers. So we were looking at in excess of $1 million, wasn't it? 1.3 or 1.5 million, but drawing on all these different interested parties who will obviously have a vested interest in creating the transport links.
Thank you. And moving back to our local authorities through Andrew.
How engaged do you think your local communities and businesses are with opportunity areas? Martin and then Sarah.
They are indeed very engaged. Most certainly businesses are engaged because of the potential for profit. So there's a vested interest to work with us as the local authority within each of our development areas, opportunity areas, and indeed wider opportunities that present within the borough. Challenge with the community, of course, is, and I alluded to it earlier on, is benefit. They will engage if there's clear benefit. I start off by saying that inequities, health, housing, and job opportunities. If there's genuine benefit, then they welcome the investment. If the result of that investment is to effectively disenfranchise them or price them out of the area, then clearly they will not welcome the development. And I'm always struck by the GLA that we don't talk about truly affordable homes. In South Africa, the average salary is around 30,000, whereas to rent a two-bedroom property, you need to have it costs £24,000 per annum. You know, that's crazy. You know, I as an elected official, forgive me, colleagues here, as an elected official cannot support such a strategy. Therefore, local people would not support an initiative that doesn't benefit them. There has to be a material benefit for locals so that they will engage in our efforts to regenerate their areas. So generally, they are engaged, but they're cautious. Because what they've seen across London and part of Southwark, unfortunately, that they have been forced out of the area either on cost or insufficient provisions. And I think with the local authority, whilst we've got some powers, it's really the GLA and sort of central government who need to give us, I would argue, far more powers to intervene in the market. So I mentioned earlier on the existing use values being the base values in which a plot of land or property might be set. But once it's identified as an opportunity area, the prices go through the roof. So why would someone who lives next door to an opportunity area engage positively with you? Because what the policy will be designed to effectively disenfranchise them. So that's my response to you. They will respond if they are, and they will receive a material benefit. Their families can continue to live in that area and benefit from the inward investment.
Yeah, thanks. I think that probably coincides with my experience in Barnet with Colindale and Mill Hill, which is a great intensification area. And the real problem there is that the communities just don't see any benefit. In fact, it's all negative. In Colindale, all these things, great tower blocks going up and all the car parking being taken up by people in the neighbouring streets from the people from the developments, because those developments aren't allowed car parking. So yes. The net result is they just fill up the local streets and annoy everybody and change the context of the area. And similarly with public transport in Mill Hill, what's happened there is that the single track line from Mill Hill East is always full before it even leaves the station. Yes. At the end of the line. So there's a lot of problems there, and I think also it's to do with the pricing, as you say. If you take the Mill Hill one, for example, there's a grant of granted was 2,500, nearly 3,000 properties, but they're only being built out at about 250 a year to keep the price up, which is just ridiculous.
Yes.
So that there's no real help there. I don't know if Sarah wants to comment on any of that.
Well, I mean, I think with most things in planning, I can echo everything that you said. Communities find change and significant change that we're always talking with opportunity areas very, very challenging. But if I'm not going to repeat things that you said. If I think about the positives, maybe, which are few and far between, but the commercial engagement with the Great West Corridor, for example. We've got loads of businesses there who are there, they've decided to locate there. The opportunity area will mean that they've got homes for their people to live in, and they've got new transport opportunities, which eases the ability for their staff to get there. That's a huge positive and a huge benefit, and they've been engaging really, really well in that. In the west of the borough, in our kind of Feltham opportunity area, we've got most of our residents, well, say 60% of our residents who need to get to Heathrow but can't get there because of the transport links. And it's prohibitive cost-wise for them to do so. You'll find lots of people getting cabs because the buses don't go or the trains don't go. So in that way, whilst the community, most of them feel like they are going to have a challenge with the scale of growth, they do see the benefits of the improved transport and connectivity that will come with the growth that they're offering. So through that way, we've been able to path a course that means that we've had quite positive engagement overall with the local plan proposals. I think the challenge for us has come when the individual sites come forward, and then the reality of what that means for an individual community is felt, overshadowing and those types of things. But overall, the strategic nature of having a planned way forward for growth gives people comfort about what they're going to have and the benefits that you can reap from that, particularly around the infrastructure.
If you want to comment, Jules, and also the question is what levers do you have to do anything other than rely on tall buildings? Because we end up with great canyons in Colindale, for example.
Yes, I mean I agree with very much what Sarah says. I think we have been talking around the issue of the value of the strategic approach, but the problem does come when it comes site by site, and then viability comes into play. And if we could say it's in the plan, this is the tariff for these things, this is the contribution you have to make to not just transport but all the social infrastructure, you have to pay for your share, otherwise the development doesn't go ahead, then life would be easier for all of us, and certainly planners and policymakers and administrations in City Hall and in local government. But site by site, we do see too much development going through at whatever stage, whether it's local authority with GLA or it gets called in by the Secretary of State and passed without sufficient infrastructure associated with the development that actually delivers on the strategic plan.
And what about tall buildings?
I don't think it's fair to characterise the plan as relying on tall buildings. It's clear that, and the Mayor's been clear when he speaks on this issue, that he believes that, and I say the plan reflects this view, that they have their place if they're well designed, if they're safe, if they make a positive contribution to the skyline. That's the policy position. Is every tall building that's got through in London in planning committees and including through City Hall, has it always achieved all of those things, particularly in terms of its positive addition to the skyline and its effect on kind of wind effects at ground level? No, I don't think it has. But that's where the planning system isn't sufficiently robust against the whole issue of viability testing.
But can you achieve the housing targets without relying on tall buildings?
I say the numbers don't rely on tall buildings. The plan's clear that sites should be optimised, not maximised. It shouldn't go as high as possible. It should just go to the height that works well for the context that site is that site is in.
And we have a new the new tall building policy in the plans very clear that it's for boroughs to identify locations for tall buildings. That might be in an opportunity area, but it might not. It depends on the opportunity area and the context. And we are clear in the policy that context and design context and historic context is an important it's an important consideration within the opportunity area. It is not a given that opportunity areas should have tall buildings. They may be appropriate in the right places in an opportunity area.
Yeah,
but the policy...
That creates mission creep. If we take Colindale, for example, we've got the defined area for the opportunity area. But on the fringes of that, they're saying, well, we want a tall building because they've got these tall buildings in Colindale. We may not be actually in the opportunity area, but we're sufficiently close to it, so let's have a tall building as well. And it's mission creep all around the area.
And that's where the borough through the local plan needs to be very clear about what a tall building is and where they would support them and where they wouldn't support them.
So, Martin, I think you want to comment.
Yes. So, in my experience, it does appear that in order to achieve our minimum red line, which is 35%, with a quantum between 70% social and 30% intermediate, that we have to. There's a quid pro quo, and viability suggests that there is an increased density. And that increased density inevitably leads, he says, to taller buildings. Okay. That seems to be the formula, and my colleague here and others might say otherwise, but that seems to be the formula I'm observing both in Southwark and across other parts of London. Again, I'm not going to repeat what I said a moment ago about the viability scheme not appropriate for in London or maybe London as a whole, but I can assure you this viability scheme you have is not fit for purpose. It needs to be reviewed. It's not appropriate. It doesn't meet the needs of local people. And for that reason, generally, I've got to tell you that applications would have brought towards my committee, which include a proposal, but it might be less than 35%, okay, but includes a tall building, I have to question very closely. One, how is it possible that a major developer, and before I continue, I should say that I maintain an open, independent view of all applications that might be brought towards my committee, just for the record here. But now to continue, that there's a recent approval which was by British Land in the Canada Water area, 35%, 38% affordable homes. There was a few taller buildings, but that was necessary to ensure viability worked for that organisation. Now, if it could work there, it could work anywhere in London, in my view. It's down to the politicians and to experts like yourselves here to ensure it's consistent. It's the inconsistencies which is the problem for the development market. And to answer your question directly, therefore, it is City Hall and local authorities that must work hand in hand, one, to ensure that viability works in London, the viability scheme works in London, and secondly, there's appropriate funding scheme that allows, where there is a deficit, for that deficit to be met by public funds, but the bureaucracy surrounding the determination of availability of those funds for that scheme should be less, I suppose, bureaucratic. I'm told, as I said already, it takes a long time. There's a great deal of paperwork involved, when in fact a chartered accountant or a plan expert could easily resolve it in a single day, but it takes a GLA sometimes years to resolve. And that's the real problem we have at the moment. And to answer your question even further, my role in planning is to represent local people. And whilst I absolutely want to attract inward investment, local people must be the beneficiaries. And if the systems do not benefit local people, then I will resist all applications, okay, whatever their form, because that is not appropriate. What it will do, it will drive industry eventually out of London to other parts of the country, because that must be the end result if you price people out of London. That cannot be in the long-term interest of this great city of London.
I think that's an important point. I mean, if you look at Barnet's population, all these opportunity areas, very few local people are moving in. We're just getting more and more people moving in. from outside the borough to fill up these tower blocks. And the net result is the population of the borough's increased, not through people moving within the borough, but new people coming in to take up all these places.
Can I say just a quick point on that point? And that's really an important one, because I've got an interesting development in my own ward. I don't need to name it right now, but let's suffice to say that it was one of the earlier schemes, not whilst I was chair, but I note that many of the dwellings were bought off books, overseas, usually the Far East. They're owned by, therefore, mainly overseas persons, and they rent to essentially local people. And of course, what we find on those estates is that the percentage that a person pays in rent, it should be around 30%, is usually closer to 50%, because the rent is so expensive. I believe that's a national scandal and should not be allowed to happen. And I will resist all applications of that form whilst I'm chair, because that is what's wrong with London at this stage. You know, these are the obvious mistakes we're making, and we can see the mistakes we're making. But I'm not seeing an adequate response from GLA, because it's abundantly obvious. You always cite it to me, you know it, but I'm not seeing a response from the GLA that clearly we're pricing people out of London. It is unacceptable, and therefore we've got to change policy.
Do you get lots of appeals?
Sorry?
If you're taking this very personal attitude, Southwark getting lots of appeals by developers?
No. We've had about a handful in recent time, but generally, we create certainty. We say a minimum of 35% affordable homes quantum with a 70-30 split between social and affordable. We should have appropriate amenity space so that both for young children, middle-aged and so on. And lastly, the design should be excellent. That's all we ask. We can negotiate around the edges. That ensures sustainability and livability of those homes. If that's the minimum, that's a reasonable expectation. A property developer builds a home for the super rich, and then doesn't have to pay any of the social consequences of their actions. I think we politicians are at fault, or we're the ones that have got to change the regime. No, we're not experiencing a flood of outward investment. We're experiencing inward investment because we have a clear, well-defined criteria on which we would accept inward investment into Southwark. It's on our terms and not on the market's terms.
Well, I think I want to allow Jules to answer that particular point. You know, I remember when Sadiq got elected, he was talking about first dibs for local people on these developments. Well, I don't actually see that happening very much.
Well, the first dibs policy is something under housing and land because it's not a planning policy. You can't have first dibs in planning terms. Instead, what the mayor has secured in first dibs terms, it has to be an informal arrangement with developers that falls outside planning. Obviously, I disagree with a lot of the comments that have just been made. I can agree entirely with the aspiration. But having seen a number of Southwark planning applications here in this chamber for stage 3s, and obviously seeing them at stage 1s and 2s, I know full well what the issues are and the realities of what all the boroughs have to contend with. You know, the mayor sets a strategic target, as the committee well knows, of 50%. We look to achieve 35% of that 50. Through planning gain, the rest being achieved through public sites and industrial sites that should be achieving more, plus the mayor's grant powers for and grant funding for affordable homes. But the problem, I think, coming back to where you started about the density and within opportunity areas, the thing is that many opportunity areas will be identified for significant capacity because they are brownfield sites and they are relatively well connected, will be if Crossrail, when it's identified that Crossrail was going to come through. I think five stations alone in Ealing, which obviously has had a big impact there as far as this issue is concerned. So they're already going to be looked at in terms of density, and then I think it's a separate issue. The whole viability thing that drives them higher is something that applies to all sites, whether or not they are in an opportunity area. The fact that they're expected to work harder than they financially are able to. So we see this with, say, the significant developments over underground stations, where they're expected to contribute to step-free access, a contribution to a TfL in some other form, supply 50% affordable housing. You can only spend the money once, but these developments are expected to spend the money 2 or 3 times over, and then all too often the balancing factor in the equation is the affordable housing, and that's what gets squeezed. And then in order to, and then it's not acceptable to pass something at 10 or 15% affordable housing, and then that's when the developers start going upwards.
We'll move on at this stage anyway. I have 3 final points on this, and I like to finish on time. First of all, I should also wish your leader, Peter John, very best what he does next. I think he announced he's retiring from Southwark last night, so he's a friend of the GLA, so I wish Peter well. Can I ask the Deputy Mayor, is one person and one organisation accountable for each of these 47 OAs? And you don't have to answer that now, you could write to me. I think one of the issues is about the huge amount of different stakeholders, so perhaps he could reflect on that and write to me. So my final question I'm going to ask is, this is the one I think Jules will like this question actually, what powers, if devolved to City Hall, would best enable you and the Mayor to accelerate the delivery of opportunity areas more effectively, mitigating the challenges faced by local authorities? Have you got a wish list that's practical?
I'd say 2 things. Powers, it's CPO, powers over land assembly. That would be that. And the other one isn't power, it's funding. Or actually, it could be powers, actually. It could be powers to raise funding. So the devolution of, fiscal devolution. So yeah. that would be it, CPO and fiscal devolution, to be able to raise the capital to make significant investments.
Thank you. Nice short summary answer. Anything else from my colleagues before I move on to other business? May I then thank our guests for their attendance in a very heated debate and very, very lively debate. Thank you to all of you for your helpful contributions to the discussion. Can we note the report and the subsequent discussion? Can we agree to delegate authority to me as Chair in consultation with the Deputy Chair to agree any output from the meeting, please? Thank you. And item 6, work programme. Can we note the progress on the work programme as set out in the report, please? Thank you. And date of next meeting. The next meeting slot is Tuesday the 17th of March at 3:30, although we are minded at the moment to be looking at a site visit, but we will agree what we do, and we maybe catch the Deputy Mayor before he disappears actually on that. And item 8, I have no urgent business, so I'll close the meeting. Thank you very much.
GLA